What are your views on the sort of this emerging generic implant segment, both in spine and maybe even areas in trauma and in the hip and knee area, to the degree you've had experience there, or this direct-to-hospital sales model where companies sell the implants directly to the hospitals. Hospitals are responsible for managing inventory, and there's no sales rep in the model.
It's interesting. We sell in 48 states in the U.S., and we really don't see it that much inside spine. We don't see a whole lot of quote-unquote generic products. I do know that they exist, and I know that there are some places that there's pockets in, and I think that there's a market for that at some point. The great thing about orthopedics is it's extremely tactile. Everything we do requires explanation and a walkthrough, and oftentimes it requires a good, talented rep. And that is a business that has a long-standing tradition inside the space, and not to say that tradition can't be broken, but I can't see in the foreseeable future that the hospital is just going to supplant that entire mechanism for potentially saving a couple of $100 or a couple of percentage points. Some hospitals have done it, and the ones that we know that have done it have augmented and gone right back to distribution model. It's just there's things that distributors and the way that this industry works, that they do, the service they provide, that really people don't like to talk about, and they do. It's just running sets, making sure that everything's there for that case. It's an extremely valuable service, and I think it's really it really is talked about in probably a deleterious way too much. And that's that service part, I think, is the whole component behind orthopedics right now that's driving and maintaining a lot of the foothold that we have inside the marketplace.
All right, Dirk?
I think I agree with you in terms of the distribution and the service that's provided, and I think that's a key component. But I do think we're going to see an evolution, maybe not a revolution in a way, as you look towards accountable care organizations or more and more of the bundled payments. And that's not just happening here in the U.S., it's happening in Europe as well, right, where they're basically creating a single payment for the entire episode. I think that's going to drive these ACOs towards looking at more of direct purchases, because the more they can control the cost of the individual components of delivering that care, the higher their profit margin is going to be. So I think it's something that as an industry we really need to stay on top of and understand how that's going to change. I don't know how you eliminate the service component when you bring in a set with 10 trays and hundreds of implants. I think that's very challenging for any hospital to deal with. But I think a lot of hospitals, if you listen to the CFOs and to the CEOs, there's certainly something they're thinking about and that they're interested in hearing about. But I think the talk is a lot more than the reality. But if you look out into the future and sort of where bundled payments are going and all of that, I think it's something to really sort of be aware of and to start think about how you can play in that environment.
It's interesting. We've seen it the most inside of ASCs, and typically they're surgeon-owned ASCs. And that's exactly what it is, because it's a bundled payment. And that's the fascinating thing about that, is because they like to say that we'll do this for easy cases. And it's always fascinating, because what case is easy, right?
I guess as a follow-up on this question, just wanted to see what your thoughts were on the physician-owned distributors. I know both of you have exposure to the spine world, so I know there's been some guidance out of the OIG that's kind of drawn those models into sort of legal questioning, but just what are your thoughts, and do you sell to any pods, and would you ever consider doing that, and do you think they stick around, do they go away?
Well, my experience with pods comes from OMTEC, and frankly, we dealt with a few of them, and if I had to do it over today, I would not. I think it was a mistake. I think it's bad for the industry. I think it's bad for physicians, frankly, and they really should be regulated out, is my opinion at this point. I don't think they really, other than allowing the physician to make more money, I don't think they really serve any purpose in terms of improving the delivery of healthcare, or really controlling cost, because it really wasn't about controlling cost, it was about moving the money, ultimately. And so, my position on those, because initially I thought, well, maybe it's a way to sort of take out the intermediary, reduce overall cost, but that's not what happened. It's just shifting. So I don't see how that benefits society or our industry or healthcare.
That's a big question too. It's interesting, there was a guidance document that came out that talked about PODs from the government, and it was a bit self-serving, right? When you ask the government to answer a question, it's going to give you an answer that it's self-benefiting. And is what the thing said is that in every instance where a pod was placed into a facility, and most of them were ASCs, ambulatory surgery centers, simply because they had the ability to use the product quicker, both surgery rates went up, costs went up, and there was no change in really patient outcome. And so those have been the arguments from the pod people that, I guess that's a new term, right? Pod people, is that it would benefit everyone, right? Everyone would have this more free flow of economy, et cetera, and that really has never happened. We've seen a shift marginally into things that are just not good. And as a company, we made a conscious effort to actually work with PODs maybe 5 or 6 years ago, or not longer, and we just were never able to really do it because not a single one of them operated under the letter of the law, which is that they had to purchase the equipment up front, they had to give us a forecast, and they actually had to run it as an independent business. And they typically didn't. They wanted consigned inventory, they wanted everything free, and then when they had to pay for instrumentation, which always made me laugh, because as our distributors know, when they go into a case, we need 60 instruments to complete a case, even a simple one, if not more. But if a POD was buying the instruments, they really only need 4. And right, a screwdriver, a gear shift, and then a counter torque, and that was it. So it's funny when the economics are placed back on the guys that actually are footing the bill for it that changes it. The challenge that the U.S. government has with it is that you can't really deregulate a pod because it really violates and interferes with the Commerce Clause. But what they have done is they've put the culpability back on the hospitals and the payer systems. And we've seen, as of recent, really in the last month, 3 major groups just completely kick companies out. So Carte Blanche just removed the company from the hospital group. So Tenon, HCA, and Baylor, even if they've owed them money, they said that you've gained this money illegally, and they just won't even pay them. So people that have these huge receivables with Tenon and HCA, they've just been kicked out and forced to the side.